It's Saturday night in the middle of winter, approximately 9 p.m. In a 23-story residential tower, a non-resident walks into the premises and sets off all of the fire hydrants. Within moments, hundreds of thousands of liters of water starts to flood into 19 of those floors. The case study we're about to talk today, I want to highlight some of those things for you. By the end of the night, 300 residents were standing on the footpath. 152 apartments within that building were affected. 65 of those apartments had water all the way through them. From an operational perspective on a claim like this, there was no broker in the chain. The strata manager, never seen anything like it. CHU were on the scene the next day. Within days, a specialist team was set up on the ground to get the building and the apartments fixed. CHU made a critical call to give every lot owner alternative accommodation, and that's without knowing the full claims cost price. The builder is authorized to start immediately on a cost plus with no fixed price, because waiting to get a fixed price could have cost tweaks that no one had. 10 days after the instance on that Saturday night, one of the lifts is already up and running. Then come the hallways. The hallways come out, fire rating linings, stripped across 19 levels, because until the fire compartments are back in, no one is allowed to move back in. Not even the residents whose apartments never even saw a drop of water. No one was allowed back in. One floor at a time, the residents are brought back into their homes and the damage repaired. 65 loss of rent and accommodation payments a month until the last one is home. What about the dollar figures attached to this story? The first estimate came in at $20 million. 14 million of that went into reserve. Just 7 weeks later, every resident is back on premises and in their homes. The final cost of the claim, just $6 million. That's not even the most impressive number. Across that 7 weeks, from the Saturday night until everyone is home, because of the regular communication that CHU had set up directly with the residents of the building, 0 complaints. Now, I'm aware that some of you may have heard of this story before, but we're not going to talk about what happened anymore. My guest today on Strata In Conversation is going to talk about how this occurred and how an entire team came together to make 5 key decision points that shaped the journey for everyone that was affected in this particular case. Would your strata management or broker company have been up to the task in this case? My name's Steve Brisson, and welcome to Strata In Conversation. And we are back. Welcome to everyone who's logged on for today's episode of Strata In Conversation. As mentioned, my name is Steve Brisson, and we are here to discuss the case in which I just laid the story out for you. Before we invite our guest who was on the ground dealing with this on the front line, I wanted to remind you that everybody who's logged on today will be eligible to for continuous professional development points for attending live today. They will come. Please allow some time for our team to get those out to you, but we will get those continual professional development points out to you. Also, if you had any questions about the amazing story that's going to be shared with you today, please pop those questions, comments, and queries into the chat, and we have specialists on hand to answer those queries and questions for you. With that being said, I've already set the table. I've set the scene. Now all I have to do is to bring in the architect the architect of how this all came together and made all of those residents feel safe, protected, and back in their homes as quick as possible. He is the head of claims at CHU. His name is David Gow, and he's with me today. Dave, how are you?
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me, and welcome everybody.
Oh, no, we're so happy to have you. And I hope I did the case justice with that opening blurb. I know there's so much information that happened in this particular case, so I wanted to make sure it was all covered, and I want to dive straight in to it with you right now.
No,
So
you covered it well, Steve.
the bat phone rings. You pick up. First of all, talk us through what's your initial reaction in the moment, and what are those steps that happen once the bat signal goes out into the air.
Yeah, so a bat phone always rings somewhere. In this case, the bat phone rang to the local BDM, who's on the ground in the area and has the relationship with the strata manager. That BDM doesn't know the full extent of the damage and the full extent of the requirements at that point of time. But they got our loss adjusters on the ground there, the local true assess team, to hit the ground. So as you said, this happened on a Saturday night. The BDM got the call first thing Sunday morning, and the true assessor was out there on the Sunday on site, getting a feel for what was required and getting those very important emergency response and emergency mitigation started as well. So that was the first few hours of the case. But the strata manager was there from 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock that night before through to the very early hours of the morning.
I don't want to embarrass you here, but and I hope I don't, but correct me if I'm wrong, you've been in this space, the claim space, for more than a couple of years. Would that be correct?
Yeah, more than a couple of years. Let's call it over 30. That's close enough, isn't it?
You said it, not me. So I want you to sort of, before we get into the nuts and bolts of what occurred, what is the likelihood, or what is the chance of this type of claim happening? Like, how often does something like this occur?
So when you work in claims for over 30 years, at times you think you have seen it all, but you never have. This one was right out of the box. This type of claim is a once in a career type of claim. I'll have claims in bigger value before I'm done, higher volumes of claims, but this was one in a career. I've never seen anything like this, and I doubt I'll come across the nuances of a claim like this again. And it's really only Strata that can deliver up a scenario exactly like this. It was quite incredible. It had everything. It had the media, the police, the SES. Now, I'm used to all those after a catastrophe, for example. I've been to cyclones, I've been to bushfires, I've been to floods, and you see SES, you see police. But this was in one location, one building, one claim, one location. A whole community was in effect impacted by one person, by one event in one building. This is out of the box, Bruce.
Yeah, that is amazing. I love the way you talk through that, the concentration, versus like a geographic spread of what's occurred in all those different elements. So I mentioned the bat phone calling,
Yep.
but I know you're amazing at what you do, but you didn't do this by yourself. So when something like this does occur, who who do you bring in? Who are the parties that start to make this all occur? Before we go into the what, let's talk about the who's who on the ground.
The who is probably the most important part of a claim, certainly at this stage of a claim. It all starts internally to start with. Have to wait a little bit to get the information in. So you get the information from the adjusters on the ground, you get information from the builders, the strata manager, of course, who knows that site better than anyone else. Information gathering so you know exactly what you're up against. The team at CHU is exceptional. I worked very closely with the major loss claims manager and the technical lead. These people, along with myself, decades of experience in the claims industry. So you had three minds working together to analyse all the information right at that very start. Then it's the broader team. So we know we had a very engaged and very experienced and very capable strata manager heading this on the ground at that particular point in time. But it also was very evident that they couldn't do it by themselves. So we had to get the right builder in. And of course, we have a builders panel. You have to get the right loss adjuster in. And of course, that was a member of our loss adjusting panel, and experts like investigators for recovery, hygienists, restoration companies to extract the water. It was like putting together an army, really, Steve.
I was literally just going to say that it sounds like there's an entire army or response team. We'd all have their little specialists that come in together to make this happen. And I think some of the things that, my favorite stats around this was the time that it took
Mm.
between event occurring and then people back in their homes for such a large scale event. It seems almost like, superhuman what you guys pulled off. One of the key things, if I don't know if you're planning on talking about this later, but it's just keeps ringing in my head. A key decision that you guys made around putting money into the hands of those affected before you even really had a full picture of what was going on in terms of the claim cost. Can you talk me through that and how you even made the decision to do that? And what are the risks attached to that and why you made that decision?
Yeah, the technical claims manager came up with that suggestion very early on in the piece, and it was very insightful that he did at that moment. And it was because there was 152 units involved. The sheer number, we knew that there was going to be people of different financial means, financially vulnerable, people whose mortgages relied on them receiving rent, for example. That was stopped because the tenant had moved out. So we knew that was going to be a particular pain point. Ordinarily, we ask for either costs to be incurred, so people send in receipts, or they send in a lease agreement or a quote from a hotel, so we have an idea of what the costs will be. In this case, we didn't do that. We injected $2,000 into the accounts of everyone entitled to either loss of rent or temporary accommodation. There is a risk involved in doing that, but that really set the scene of trust and understanding. And it gave the tenants and the lot owners that reassurance that this wasn't going to be a difficult process. And we were there to look after their interests right from the very start.
I just to interject there, you mentioned the technical claims manager suggestion there. Um, is there a checklist or what factors is he considering
Yeah.
in order for him to make such a decision? Like I know you said there's a once in a lifetime claim and it doesn't usually occur that way.
Yeah.
What what factors is he bringing in and putting across your desk for consideration for him to be able to suggest and make that a recommendation with confidence?
Yeah. So in this case, he almost reverse engineered it. He looked at the risks of not doing it rather than the risks of doing it. Um, by not doing it, you're taking a lot more time. You're putting people at financial risk. Now, to mitigate that, the risk for CHU was overpaying. We made a decision very early on in the piece in conjunction with the loss adjuster. They had a team of forensic loss adjusters as well, who we appointed to this case, who were going to backdate and have a look at all those costs incurred once they were done. So we made it very clear to the lot owners and at the lot owners there that submit the costs, let us know, we'll give you $2,000 up front, but then we are going to go back and verify that with you just to make sure that everything was paid as required. So there was that reassurance that the risk of overpaying someone, and you're only going to overpay someone if, for example, the unit was unoccupied, for example, and there was no rent, there was no temporary accommodation required. But that's very easy to double check and verify in the back end. So it was a great suggestion and one that set that claim off on the right foot. And it made it easy for the progress payments from there on in. So that wasn't the last payment we made on that one by any stretch, but we're able to do it in a very timely manner. At no point was anyone financially disadvantaged at all.
As you're describing the sequence of events, and even as I was reading that opening blurb, it's like something you see in a movie when, like the fire alarm goes
Yeah.
off, and then you see like hundreds of people standing looking up at a building, like across the road somewhere. Something that I'm really interested about is when you have an empty building that's like empty within a matter of minutes, and you've got, as you mentioned, like 300 people standing outside with 152 different sets of circumstances.
Yeah.
How does the allocation of benefits, how does that even work? How do you know like who gets what, who's entitled? I think there'd be a lot of people on the call listening now, like really interested in how did you understand who was in which bucket and what scenario and how to assist each of them the best way?
That early stage was, let's just get some money into accounts and verify that. So on day one, that took away that important aspect. The biggest aspect of this, of course, is the building claim, which is easy because that has one insured, the owner's corporation, and that process started immediately as well. And from then on, we put together a call center. So any resident, whether they be lot owners or if tenants had any inquiries, They were able to reach someone immediately and get that information and put their case forward for any specific circumstances. We did have vulnerable residents there, for example, and we had to give them some sort of priority. The strata manager would have been receiving information that would have changed priorities at different stages of the time as well. So I was gathering all that information, prioritizing them, making sure people weren't left in a queue. They weren't left with their inquiry taking 10, 15 days to be responded to. There was a way of getting information to CHU and information in return from CHU as well.
Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to jump into another element which I talked about in the blurb, and that was the decision to go. And maybe again, you can talk around your technical manager, the decision around the cost plus model.
Mm.
Like and I know, like from a CHU perspective, that could sound like you've got an open checkbook to just do whatever you wanted to do. But again, as you had mentioned earlier, there are risks that come with this and there are risks that come with that. But I know that the priority was, a quick turnaround on getting things commenced. So can you talk to us about not just any particular instance like injecting the accounts with a little bit of cash, but on the building works and the cost plus model, talk us through the rationale, the decision points there.
So a cost plus model is not unique to an insurance claim. It is normally not the preferred way to go. You normally go the traditional way when you've got time up your sleeve, when you know there's hail damage to a metal roof, there's no water entry, you can take time and get competitive tenders. We certainly didn't have the luxury in this case with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of litres of water going from level 23 right down to the basement car park, the lifts and everything being impacted. We just did not have that luxury. The biggest consideration there was kitchens and bathrooms. The longer water is in situ, the longer it can take to cause damage to particle board, cabinets in the kitchens and the bathrooms, the tiles will pop, that sort of thing. So we were anticipating that we would lose a number, a high volume of either kitchens, bathrooms, and both. And that was our priority, was to limit the number of those that had to be removed. Now, obviously, there's a big cost in removing them, but also when you haven't got a kitchen and you haven't got a bathroom, it takes a lot longer for that resident, be they a lot owner or a tenant, to move back in. So that was the priority that we had there. We stripped the walls in the common areas, and that allowed the drying to take place, and did all the restoration work within the 60 odd units that were impacted internally. So the very initial cost that you mentioned by quantity surveyors and building consultants was in the vicinity of $20 million. And that included the removal and replacements of kitchens and a much longer repair period of time as well, which increased temporary accommodation and loss of rent. Without that cost plus basis, it could have been close to that, Steve. It might have been in that vicinity. And when you weigh that up, the risks of overcharging, the risks of including something that may not have been damaged, may have been maintenance, it pales in insignificance to the risk of not doing it and having to go and replace those kitchens and bathrooms.
Yeah, so this part's so interesting for me as someone myself who I know you and I have spoken, offline about the fact that I'm going through this process right now about putting a house up. So I am aware of like the costs that go into, getting a building. And one of the things that really struck me was like the ensuring of that invoicing and who maintains the integrity of that along to ensure it just doesn't get out of control. And I know there's also something that I hear about every month, the magic word variations.
Yeah.
So like how was that handled in this particular process? Because I'm sure there was a million things happening all at the same time. So how was that financial side all, held to such tight control with such an excellent performance on the other side?
Well, it goes back to that very first comment that I made, is about the team you put together. Don't underestimate the benefits of putting in a panel builder. Now, this panel builder has had probably a decade over of experience with CHU, and naturally they'll want to continue that relationship for decades to come as well. So we're actually dealing with a trusted partner on the building side. Now, that said, you don't rest on that by any stretch. You have building consultants, engineers who are working with that builder all the way through. Again, companies that we've had long-standing relationships with. You've got a loss adjuster there overseeing it as well. The loss adjuster was on site every single week, climbing those 20 odd floors, keeping an eye on all that as well, working with the builder, answering questions. What do you think we should do here? Do you agree with my methodology here? That was all discussed and agreed. Then, of course, the costs are submitted as well. And we have a quantity surveyor to go through line by line to make sure that the costs were in line with the work conducted and the materials put in as well. So it's a bit more labour intensive at the back end. The consultant's costs would certainly have been higher than in a traditional claim where you do a competitive tender. But the crucial thing is we're able to start as soon as practical. Steve, you mentioned the lifts as well, 10 days to get one lift operational. Now, that sounds great for transport, for people to get up and down. But what people don't think about is the tradies that are on site, the restorers, the builders. Imagine carting equipment, drying equipment up 23 floors. Imagine stripping skirting boards and particle board walls and taking them down 23 floors. The physical toll that has on an individual, and of course the time taken as well. So to get a lift that was submerged on the ground floor in the basement car park up and running in 10 weeks, the second one took a lot longer, but just to get the transport up and down, that was crucial as well. Throughout this claim, there were crucial moments. Unfortunately, they all fell into place on this one.
Just to correct what you said, you mean 10 days it was up and running, not 10 weeks.
I
Is
beg
that
your
correct?
pardon. Let's say 10 days.
No, that's even more. No, I
Yeah.
like the way you did that.
No, thank you.
Because, but what seems to really be standing out to me is the open communication and you setting up your Avengers team to ensure that you had those right people in place. And I think a large part of that was ensuring that constant line of communication. I love how you set up the call center to ensure that people were informed. One of those key informed decisions that I want to ask you about was that initial claims estimate versus the outcome. How do you sort of justify such a large difference in that, and how was this communicated to any lot owners, obviously to their benefit, but how was that such a large gap communicated to those affected?
Yeah, this was a big change in the reserve that we set. And as a claims manager, you really do strive to get that reserve accurate from as soon as you possibly can. So the initial reserve that we had from the quantity surveyors was $20 million. We weren't satisfied on that, but we didn't jump in and set that one, but we did set it at about $15 million. Now, that would have been the record CHU claim. Well, that was the record CHU claim at that point of time. When you're changing reserves, I will say right now, it's much more palatable reducing the reserve than increasing it. So there was one benefit there. The lot owners aren't so interested in the reserve. The lot owners are interested in the repairs being done and getting back into their homes that they have been displaced from. The partner that we had to be most communicating with and the most concerned with was our capital providers, QBE. Now, they hold us in very high stead. They have a high amount of trust in what we do in claims. And that's because we work so closely with them. We inform QBE of every update and every step in the way, to the point that none of this was a surprise. And in fact, as the claim went on, it was anticipated that no, we didn't need to remove a kitchen. No, we didn't need to remove the bathrooms. No, we're not looking at 6 months loss of rent or 6 months temporary accommodation. We're looking at 2 months. That was all factored in. So as the claim goes and through the life of the claim, you get more information that allows you to amend the reserve. So whilst getting the reserve incorrect is not great, I must say it was fairly well received by all parties in this particular case.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. And that gap in that opening blurb, the gap is such a large gap. It must be incredible to be able to communicate that, and such a pat on the back for the whole team to be able to work to achieve such an outcome.
Yeah, the team.
I wanted to ask you a question about, in this particular case, I understand the owner's corporation is the insured. So with them being able to sort of lawfully instruct you and make those decisions, did anything in this particular case study, did anything require sort of like a committee resolution or a general meeting in order to get what you were trying to achieve across their table and approved before it was done, or was just everything operating on that case by case basis? How did that work?
So the strata manager was the voice of the owner's corporation. The strata manager, as I said, was extremely engaged and active, and the chair of the owners corporation was heavily involved, representing the bodies in those 152 units, the people involved, the people who live there or have investments there. So there was a clear line of communication from the owners corporation to the strata manager, who then communicated with us as well. So anything we did was step by step. As we mentioned, Steve, the communication was next level on this claim, and it had to be. So it was a fairly simple process. As long as the communication was flowing both ways, there was never an issue with any kind of sign off. You mentioned extraordinary meetings. This was another unique case in this one. We did have an extraordinary meeting about a month and a bit in with all the residents who needed a timely update, who needed a good, clear update. And that involved a loss adjuster, a member of the CHU major loss claims team, and of course the strata manager on stage talking to a hall full of people.
I wanted to touch on that because you had just mentioned here that the strata manager is acting on behalf of the owners corporation. But you also, in the same instance, mentioned that you had set up a call center where owners were able to directly communicate with CHU and get progress updates, etc. Is there a risk in your experience that a strata manager could feel that you're sort of taking over the communication between them and the client, and they're sort of getting lost somewhere in the middle? How was that handled in this particular instance, if at all successful?
Yeah, there is a risk in doing that. And the risk increases if the strata manager is isolated. Now, just like this was a once in a career type of claim for me, I'm hoping for the strata manager involved that this is a once in a career moment for them as well. I actually spoke to him post this event and said, don't worry, this is only once in a career, but he's about 40 years old. So then I said, geez, you've got 20 years left. So I'm hoping I'm right there. But this was the first time he had experienced a loss on this scale as well. And the reality is, one person cannot do it. So that one person did need the assistance of their insurer and the force that the insurer can bring in terms of the team that we appointed as well. So it was a very simple decision for the strata manager to make, to have that assistance. But again, every bit of communication was done in conjunction with the strata manager. There was no surprises there from them.
So we're going to jump out of the story for a moment, and we're going to pop up an animation that sits underneath you, and it's going to call Dave Word of Wisdom tip number 1. Okay. And what I want you to do is, for all of the listeners that might be trying to find some benefit from the story so far and how they can implement what you did on such a much larger scale, what would you say to them about what helped in the way you communicated, and how this might help us, a smaller instance that doesn't have the money or specialist support that you did in that particular instance? What can you impart on them that might help them in their day-to-day roles?
That's a question we've posed ourselves so many times post this event. What worked so successfully in this one, what can we do to implement that on a smaller claim? So we had 152 lots that were damaged, no complaints to our IDR team. Why do we get complaints on a 4 or 6 lot claim? Surely if you can do it on one, you can do it on the other. Let's go back to the start. When this claim happened, the communication we knew was probably the most important aspect, following by the building repairs. The communication started with knowing that there was media on the ground. So we even got our media team, our marketing team, to talk to the strata manager as to what happens if there is more media inquiries and where to direct them to. So it started right there and then. We knew that there were going to be bulk inquiries. We knew that there were going to be up to 150 people that needed a question answered. Now, one strata manager can't manage that. A broker can't manage that if there was a broker on it. And even a loss adjuster cannot manage it. So if the three of them together couldn't manage it, how could we expect this claim to be successful in that regard? So therefore, that call center was established very early on in the piece. And I actually rang the CEO of the loss adjusting company involved and said, this is the kind of the scale that I needed. Steve, I mentioned I've been to catastrophes before where we've had hundreds, thousands of claims. I treated this like a mini catastrophe because this was one claim, one event, one incident caused by one person, but it was in effect a whole community that was impacted. So we wanted people to have the answers before before they even needed to ask the question. So we had the call center there, we had email communications, we had weekly on-site site visits with the key stakeholders as well. So that's how it worked with that claim. So how can we apply the same logic to a smaller claim of 4, 6, 10 lots? Well, naturally, you can't put a call center on that. We can't get our marketing team involved in that. We can't do weekly emails to 4 people when really that's one phone call to a loss adjuster or the normal communication cadence. So going ahead, what we're looking at is a way to automate that. I think in the future, AI will play a part in that. We can decipher information on a lot by lot basis and put it on some kind of portal to allow people to self-serve and have access to that same level of information that the people in this particular case did as well. That's what the future will look like.
So that might sound like someone, I know AI does a lot of the job, but when we're talking about, I think you mentioned weekly comms message and stuff, what is the offset that you see to that? Because to me, that sounds like someone has to program what type of messaging is going out. Why does that end up being more efficient than creating additional workload? Can you tell our listeners why you believe that I love the word you use, the predictive. Like why do you think that that's more efficient in the long run versus that's taking more head hours and that more reactionary model?
Yeah. So when you've got 150 lots involved, not everyone wants the same type of information at the same speed and the same regularity. So some people are very hands off. You know, they live overseas. It's an investment property. There was no water damage. All they're really worried about is their loss of rent being paid. So you might not hear from them at all. Then you've got someone who relies on access to that unit for caring for their family, access to close to proximity to work, that sort of thing, and getting back into that unit is what they wake up thinking about every single day. So they want something to be able to go to and get that information. And it could be when the car park is open. When can I bring the car back in there? When is my floor going to be open? When is the lift going to have access? When can I go back in and get my personal effects? You can't predict which one of those 150 units want that bit of information at any time. So to put it all in one place, collate it, and have it there for when people want it, in the detail that they need it, that's the benefit of having that regular communication there. And if it's not there, well, they've got the option of contacting a call center, not contacting their loss adjuster who might be on another building site or dealing with someone else, not having to wait for a strata manager who's got any number of other buildings that they manage on top of the 150 lots impacted on this. So having the access to communication and the ability to go and find it yourself if you do need it, that was the reason we didn't get any complaints to our IDR team. Not everything went perfectly, but no one had the need to say, I can't find that information, I'm going to make a complaint.
Yeah. One of those other decisions I think you just touched on there is that decision around the different impact to different residents and the decision to stagger return. That it's not like an empty building and all of a sudden you've got 300 people coming back in the same hour on the same day. What was the driver around that staggered return approach? I know you said you had a lift operating sooner than maybe the hallways or whatever. So what were some of the driving factors that helped you to make the decision to allow the staggered return approach where some return before others? And was one of those factors cost or ease for customers, just like residents just wanting to be back in their primary residence and not in that sort of temporary accommodation situation?
I could probably say all of the above. Every part of what you said plays a part in that. There was a lot of questions, some frustration from some lot owners who would say, my unit did not get one drop of water into it I know I can get access to my floor. Why won't you let me back into my unit? And what was evident was the firewall. So I mentioned earlier on, we had to strip the wall linings to let the drying process commence. Imagine letting people back into units when there was no fire rated walls on a whole floor. Now, that's something I would you'd never live with if you did that, and that could happen. We've seen examples overseas in Grenfell and in London and in Hong Kong of the damage that fire can do when it spreads in a multi-lot complex like this one. So there were reasons we couldn't get people back in, but we've got those walls put in as quickly as we can and allow them back in. A builder would prefer to put scaffolding and fencing around a site and say, this is a work zone, come back when we're done, because health and safety, access issues, noise, you're not going to annoy people when you're working on floor 5 when someone on floor 4 is back in. That's the easiest way to do it. But we wanted to get these people back into their homes as quickly as we possibly could. And of course, there is a financial benefit from that as well. But every claims manager will say to you, a successful claim is when you can keep claims costs low, customer service high, and reduce the claims life as well. So by doing these things, we achieved all 3 of those important aspects of a claim.
One of the things that you said to me in the very first opening remarks is this: you only can see a situation, you only get all of these elements in Strata.
Mm.
And I want to push that a little bit now.
Yeah.
Because I think that you've sort of illustrated that putting an apartment building back together is not the same as just repairing a house, right? So when you have these additional compliance demands and you're dealing with like regulation and regulatory, I think you talked really well around the fire rating in hallways or the ceilings and elevators and things like that. How are you able to shape that around dealing with all of these additional factors that come into play, more than just a singular residence that's had like a similar catastrophic event? That's not saying that that doesn't happen in singular houses, but what happens when all of those additional elements come into play that, as you said, only happen in Strata?
Yeah, this is a point that I try and get across whenever I'm speaking to an audience, and mostly an audience that isn't involved in strata claims. Strata claims are unique in the industry, whether you're talking about domestic household claims or business pack claims of a factory, for example, or a business. They are completely different. I always reflect on a person I was interviewing for a job here, and they said, look, am I going to be challenged by strata claims? Are they a bit boring? And I just said, wait till you see what's coming, and a case like this is a perfect example of that. When you've got a strata claim, you've got a strata manager. There could be a building manager. There could be real estate agents looking after the tenanted properties. In this case, you've got 152 lots, over 300 individuals that call this place home. And you've got brokers, and then you've got the owners corporation. So the stakeholders are like nothing else in insurance. And that's the thrill, that's the challenge. And that's what we've got to really focus on when we've got a claim like this. How do we keep all those stakeholders involved? Now, from an insurance perspective, let's look at something as simple as claim life. This claim could only be closed as quickly as the slowest person who wants to get their ceiling painted in a room they don't use. So claim life can blow out that way. In one domestic claim, if you've got a hail damage roof to your house next door to where you live, that's one person that can make a complaint. In this case, we had 150 times that. So in effect, it's 150 claims in any other insurer, in any other example, wrapped up in one claim that Strata is specific to. So it is an incredible nuance, Steve, and one that only Strata delivers. And a point that I like to make as often as I can, just to show how challenging it is. Whilst it's rewarding, it's challenging. And this won't be a surprise to the vast majority of people online now. Strata managers, brokers who work in this specific product, no surprises there, but it's amazing how there is that lack of understanding in the industry as a whole.
Yeah, right. One of the nuances that you did mention was this, earlier you said that you'd been onto all these more natural disasters like cyclones and those floods. But
Mm,
one of the nuances with this particular case is that it was in fact a malicious
yeah.
in intent of doing that. From your perspective, what complexity does that bring? And are you able to sort of, pursue recovery against the person who did cause this for so many people? And how does that work?
Yeah.
How did that work in this?
Even down to the cause of damage was unique in this case. Nothing was normal. Nothing was normal. So one person entered the ground floor following someone in through the secure area, made their way to the 23rd floor, set the fire hydrants off, went down to the 22nd, did the same thing, went down to the 21st and opened the fire hydrants there, releasing hundreds of thousands of litres of water. So in the early stages, that was identified as the main reason, but you've got to cover all bases. Was this a fault that a tradesman might have done working on site that day? And then there's a good clear chance of recovery. You have to find out the exact cause of the water damage. Now, in this case, it was a homeless person that made their way in, and for reasons unknown, they went to that. There's no link to the building that anyone ever discovered. The police did arrest the person involved, but of course, you can imagine that the recovery potential is nil in a case like this. But certainly, when there is this quantum of claim, this value of claim, recovery is something that you have to look at. And we did put investigators onto it just to cover that off once and for all, to make sure that there wasn't any recovery opportunity missed. But yeah, that certainly was a focus on that, and we work closely with QBE in doing that.
Is there anything that the owners in this case missed out on because of they didn't have that relationship, or they didn't have that set up with a broker? And what do you see could be optimized in that area?
People who may have seen me speak in the various insights seminars that I've spoken at, I often say the most successful claims that I have seen have had an engaged policyholder, strata manager, broker, and insurer, which includes loss adjusting and the team as well. Now, this particular claim didn't have a broker, which is unusual. There was no detriment to anyone involved in this claim for two reasons. One, because as I mentioned, the strata manager was simply exceptional in this case. You know, one of the best, and deserves a lot of credit for the not only the amount of time that they put into it, but the quality of the time that they put into it as well. But of course, it goes back to what I've been saying at the very start of this webinar, Steve. And we did treat this claim a little bit differently to suit the circumstances of this claim, and that included no broker being there, but included all the hundreds of other individual aspects that I've already gone through in detail in this case, and you adapt to what's put in front of you.
So it happened. You've spoken about it. We've tried to uncover all of the different elements. What have you taken away from that particular instance, not only for you, but for, when you're speaking to your entire team across the country and offshore, about what lessons you took away from this? And has this particular instance changed anything about the way that you and your team operate? Any little nuggets of wisdoms or experience that you took in there and going, wow, like this really highlighted that we need to do this, or this really highlighted that we shouldn't do that, from an efficiency perspective? Is there anything that you took away from this particular instance?
After every catastrophe, for example, you do a debrief and you say, what could we do better? And that changes depending on the catastrophe as well. Your response to a bushfire is very different to a hail event, to a cyclone, or to a flooding. But you learn something each time you do something. You just don't know what that next catastrophe is going to be. This one's no different. I couldn't have predicted a case like this. If we were doing a a mock-up event to try and think, what could we do to test our systems? I don't think I'll be
Yeah, stress test the systems.
Yeah, I don't think I'll be able to come up with this scenario. It is that
Yeah.
unique. What I was pleased though, when we did debrief and when we look at what we did and how we did it, we had the right people there. We had the right people in here at CHU. We had the right people with our partners at QBE, the strata manager, and then going out to the experts that we have on our panel and established relationships over, if not years, decades as well. So what it did prove that if we can manage and wrangle our way out of a case like this, we're ready for the next one, regardless of what it is. Now, as I said, this case I'm expecting to be one in a career, but I haven't seen everything. There'll be something else that I'll be sitting here in 2, 3, 4, hopefully 10 years' time, and saying, I never thought I'd see something like this. I just don't know it. But you do learn from cases like this. And we've actually even employed little things we've learned from this claim in other cases, just not to this scale. So it's already happened.
Thanks so much for agreeing to be on this particular episode. And as soon as I knew that we were doing this series, I was like, oh, we need to talk about that because it's such a cool story of like so many people and so many of the puzzle pieces working together to find a solution. I know you love sharing your experience on this one because I know, as you said, you've been working for a hot minute in this industry, and this one really stood out to you. So thanks so much for taking your time. And if there's any last message that you wanted to share with all of our listeners, I'd be happy for you to sort of share that now in like one last takeaway.
Claims is something that I'm passionate about. I love working in claims. I love managing the claims team that I have here at CHU. I love dealing with the claims brokers that we deal with as well. We've seen the rise of and the importance of people who work in brokerages that work in claims, advocating for their clients. So it's a great part of the industry to work in. Sharing a case study like this, I love it. And I hope that comes across and demonstrates what a good part of the industry it is to work in, especially in strata.
Well, I'll let you in on a little bit of a secret, and please don't share that beyond this call. When we did this series, as I mentioned, I specifically asked for this one to be a part of it. I love good storytelling, and I think that this is a great story with a great outcome, almost like one of those 90s action Hollywood films where something's occurred to a building. I don't know, whichever one you want to think of. But I'll leave that to your imagination. But really, for me, I love the arc. I love the execution. I love how we got there in the end. And you tell it with so much passion and with so much experience. So thanks so much to you for being online. I hope you had a great conversation. And I look forward to having more conversations with you at the next one, but hopefully that's in another 100 years and it's not next month. There's another claims case that you need to bring to us. But if there is, I'm here and we can talk about it here. Thank you, Dave. And thank you to you. Thank you to everyone who has, number one, taken time out of their day to join us for today's conversation. I hope you got something as much as I did out of this conversation. And an extra special thank you to those who populated questions, comments, queries inside the chat. Our specialists are always happy to take your comments. And just a reminder that our team will be sending out your CPD points, so just hold on. We will get those out to you very, very shortly. What I can tell you is next month we are back. As always, we are rolling these things through month by month, and we will get another engaging, informative, entertaining episode out to you. We want to deliver the best. So if there's any particular topic that you want to hear about, again, drop that into the comments and we'll do our best to add that to our string of episodes that we're putting in this series together for you. I hope you've had a great time. My name is Steve Brisson, and until next time, peace.